Welcome back to the Bochum Regional Championships. We are on day 2 of the day 2 Swiss rounds of our regional, where all the players from the day 1 were going in, who 5 and 2 or better have now made it here, and we are currently going into the 3rd round very shortly. My name is David Partington, and of course I am joined by the lovely Lou. How are you?
I am doing well. It's amazing to kick things off on this day 2 action with 2 phenomenal matches, and we're now here with our 3rd Swiss round of the 5 that our players have to battle out in order to get to that top 8 cut.
Yes, they are. So we're going to be featuring a couple of players who are currently X and 1 at the moment. So they're doing pretty well at the moment. And
I'd say so.
Yeah, exactly. They've got 3 more rounds to go, and especially getting a win here will probably put them in very good stead to potentially get to that top cut.
Yes, one of the biggest upsets of the tournament so far was actually Alex Soto, the player running that Trick Room team from Series 1 that he's carried over from the Liverpool Regionals, and he was actually undefeated up until last round, where he faced against Faaiz, a really well-known German player who was able to finally give him that 1 loss in the match.
Yes, and he is now coming up with us today. And you may have heard us talking kind of before about Torkoll last time and this morning as well, because it's been something that's really seemed to have risen in popularity. And yet again, here it is in this round 3.
Yes, that's the thing. Torkoll really dominated the broadcast. When we actually looked at the statistics, I was surprised in the overall usage it wasn't actually higher, because it seemed to be absolutely everywhere. But I think it was more that it was the surprise, the one that I guess people made as the hot medical take coming into the event. Whereas Pokemon like Fluttermane, Iron Bundle, Iron Hands in particular, has kind of been all over the competition, with over 50% of people running that Fluttermane. And I think it's been really interesting to see which Paradox Pokemon, obviously this is the first Series 2 regional we've had in Europe, and obviously from regionals and internationals that have been taking place in different locations around the globe, that those Paradox Pokemon are still so strong. Normally when there's a Pokemon that comes in and kind of defines the meta, you see lots of Pokemon rising up to counter it. For example, when Dondozo is everywhere, Murkrow came into the fray, for example. And then people start to counter Murkrow, so it fades off, so you need another Dondozo counter, so on and so forth. But at the minute, Fluttermane is finding it a very strong position for itself here in the meta, and it's taking trainers a little bit more kind of curves and tricks in order to try and deal with it.
I think it is, and especially when it has so much offensive power as well behind it, and the items it runs can often still vary. So if you want to try and train one of your Pokemon to be able to take the one-hit knockout on it, then that's great. But when you go up against a Focus Sash Fluttermane, suddenly that game plan completely changes. So it's not only just the one Pokemon or the one spreads it can run, it's just the variety that we've been able to see here. And I think a lot of our players, especially with these Fluttermanes, have maybe kind of been more veering to more the choice specs variant at the moment, possibly saving that Focus Sash for something like the Iron Bundle, which is often quite a common lead to be able to support those icy winds and general kind of speed control.
I think it's such an interesting observation coming into the 2023 series, because we have open team lists, and that's not something that we've actually had before in VGC, and I think it brings a whole new dynamic to the game, because like you said, there's so many different variations you can run. Forget Terra for a second. On the items, like you say, there's Choice Specs, Focus Sash on these Fluttermanes. On Pokemon like Golden Go, we've seen things like the Choice Scarf, again, things like Berries, we've seen Leftovers, we've seen Choice Specs again. And when it was closed team lists, you often had to use game 1 as an information game. So you had to try and scout out what your opponent is using, and know what your damage calculations are to maybe see, oh, that was clearly a Choice Specs amount of damage, or oh look, I've spotted there's a Life Orb there, or I used to always play in 2017 Hunt the Focus Sash, because sometimes I would look at a team and I'm like, 4 of these Pokemon could run that Focus Sash, which one is it? And in an open team list, you actually have the luxury of knowing which one it is already. You don't have to kind of move around for it.
And what I find quite interesting is that, like, in those open team sheets, that there's some moves that may be kind of more beneficial for you than others. Because going into that closed team sheet format, a Pokemon could have Protect, it could not. It could be having certain coverage moves, it could not. But as soon as you know something doesn't have Protect, it's suddenly such an already safe slot to say kind of target into, and suddenly reduces how much defensive capabilities you have. But if you suddenly do have it, you don't even have to go for it. It's still that just because of having that option gives your opponent more things that they need to think about.
And that's why I'm grateful for open lists in the face of Terra as well, because the amount of times you might be thinking, well, it could be any of these Terra types, which one is it going to be? And that can really catch your opponent off guard. And I think it does lead to a little bit less of kind of, I suppose, skill in terms of pivoting and ball positioning and thinking through the turns, because it ultimately becomes more of a guessing game, which is why I really like the introduction of these open team lists, because it does kind of equal the playing field a little bit more and then makes it easier for the players to adjust. discussed. Speaking of the players, though, we have got some standings for you to check out as well with how things are going on here in Bochum. You can see Alex Soto and Faaiz Ashfaq and Giuseppe have that 10-1 record. They're currently at the top of our standings.
Exactly, with 3 more rounds to go as well. After this round, you may have the 12-1 going in as well, and I think if you're X1, that's pretty much guaranteed at this point. Although it does depend on how other people do. You may have the odd extra X1 potentially. So even though these players are maybe getting the record that will typically get them into the top 8, they've got to make sure that they are still doing their absolute best to be able to push themselves through, because resistance is still kind of a potential thing that could influence who makes it through and who doesn't.
Yes, and I really want to highlight some of the players that we featured yesterday to kind of grow their story a little bit more. Of course, Alexandra with that Sandy Shocks on that team as well. Really nice to see her still at the X and 2. Again, Eric Rios, Marcus Stata. We've also got David Kutesh, Alex Gomez, Guillermo Castilla, all players at 9 and 2 who were able to kind of showcase yesterday, still doing really, really well in the competition, well within that top cut contention.
Absolutely, and Alexandra at the bottom there, she was running a Masquerada as well, which was
so
really cool,
which
we just haven't seen at all yet at the moment, because more people favouring the grass type of the Amoongus or like maybe the Brute Bonnet occasionally, but still sticking with that, and she really showed the potential of it yesterday in our Swiss rounds versus the Dondozo team.
Exactly. You can see this is the current standing for that top 16, and in top 16 you get more championship points and things like that as well. So even if you miss out of top 8, you still will be able to walk away with some good championship points to put towards that World's invite for Yokohama, Japan in August.
Exactly. Loads of people are wanting to get that World's invite, and we're relatively kind of still early on in the season. There's plenty of other events that people can go to at the moment. A few more European events, and of course the European International Championships in London later on, I think in May this year. So that's where a huge amount of championship point potential can be distributed out. So I think there's a lot of people who maybe haven't done so well today are thinking, right, EUIC is still around the corner.
Yeah.
There's still that time for me to kind of build and really practice hard to be able to get a huge chunk of points for that World's invite.
Yeah, I think it's actually a little bit earlier. I think it's in April, but that's the nicest thing. It comes sooner rather than later. We don't have to wait around for it as long. And I think that's the key thing. You've talked about, obviously, all these regionals and special events we've got, but the international championships really is that one tier below the world stage. And on an international stage as well, you get players coming from all over the world. I mean, we still have a lot of players who have, made that journey here to humble Bochum in Germany. But on the international stage, that's where you really want to pit yourselves against players that you maybe have never faced before. And it really is often a time for players to come and carve out their own mark in history in terms of the Pokemon annals.
And Gavin Michaels last week in Oceania really carved his out in the first international of our season in Melbourne, in Australia, which was really something to behold in terms of seeing how people were first using these Paradox Pokemon, where we hadn't had too many Series 2 events. It was still kind of early on in the season. People were still figuring out what to do. And what seemed to really shine from his team was that rain duo that we saw that actually wasn't too common at the time. But then we really expected that this kind of weekend, the following week. And as you saw from the usage stats that we kind of put earlier, there wasn't a Pelipper to be found. That's
really true. Pelipper was just, stayed in Melbourne a little bit more. But I think it's an interesting point to note. Obviously, Wolf Glick also won the Orlando Regional Championships with the Peristrap team using that Screamtail. And I don't see Screamtail picking up in usage. Or, that said, it's a very difficult team to pilot, but even so, you would think that more people would just be trying out, being like, hey, it won. I don't know what to run. I'm going to pick this team because clearly it's got a lot of success. And actually, it's kind of not risen through the ranks. And it's kind of the same with Gavin Michaels' team. I think components of it have been picked up. Dragonite's still obviously very key, and obviously Palafin people are using, but the actual team composition people haven't been using coming into an event. It could also be said maybe you would predict that people would hard counter it, so there's no point even trying to bring it.
And here we have our players for our round 3. We have Faaiz versus Giuseppe, who are both that 10-1 going in, so feeling pretty confident for sure. But they now are up against each other, both doing equally well, so who is going to be able to take the win from each of them here? Looking at their teams here, which you'll be able to see very shortly, we've got some fairly common Pokemon in here. Both we've got the Iron Bundle as well. Both have got that Fluttermane. Amoongus is still on one of the sides, but we do have that Torkoal that Faaiz is running. And it's interesting that you said, Lou, that we had Faaiz kind of coming off the back of that win versus the Hard Trick Room. I wonder how much of a role that kind of Torkoal has played with, which what we can see here is a Flamethrower kind of Yawn set, which is that kind of more supportive, slowing the pace down and kind of dishing out those sleep potentials to those Pokemon, where something like an Arcanine would just activate Defiance and stuff like that.
you have to be feeling confident if you're Faaiz right now. You've just, felled the undefeated player in this tournament. And, again, with that hard Trick Room kind of team that's coming out into the fray, I wonder if there was possibly a Torkoal mirror going down. We obviously know that Alex was also running a Torkoal in that Trick Room team, but in the battle of the turtles, Faaiz seemed to have obviously come out victorious. Taking a closer look as well at Giuseppe's team, it seems to be quite standard in the sense there's a lot of Pokemon that we've seen already. Pokemon like the Fluttermane are there, the Iron Bundle, and the Arcanine. And Arcanine getting into that top 3. In fact, I think it was those 3 are the top 3 used Pokemon in this Day 2.
Yeah, and there's no surprise either, because Arcanine, even though it's all the way back from Generation 1, still has access to that reliable Intimidate and lots of damage control, both on the physical side and the special side. And Fire Offense is still obviously very useful here too. So there's no surprises that we do see those Pokemon here. However, I'm looking on Giuseppe's side and seeing kind of an answer as to for what he can deal with when it comes to the Iron Bundle at the moment. Because he's obviously got his own Iron Bundle, but looking down the rest of his Pokemon, there's not a lot that deals with it super effectively. There is that booster energy on the Iron Bundle that Faaiz has at the moment, but as a speed control option for him, it seems to be really good here versus Giuseppe's Iron Bundle, which is Covert Cloak. So he's always going to have the upper hand in terms of speed control as Faaiz.
Let's take a look at the accomplishments of both these players so you at home get to know them better as well. Faaiz has got lots of amazing top finishes, and dating back as far as 2014 in Germany Nationals, got that top 16 finish. In 2019, more recently, EUIC top 32, and then at the online events, and I really like to see this where players test their mettle both in-person events and online. In Players Cup 4, was able to get top 6 in Europe, as well as most recently getting that top 4 finish in Liverpool. That's something that Faaiz is going to be looking to try and beat at the Bochum Regional Championships.
And on Giuseppe, yeah, USC top 16 is very big, because that was a huge tournament, I seem to remember, last year. So that would have been a huge chunk of championships points for him. The DC Open top 8 in 2020, Bolzano's special event top 16, and the Sindelfingen Regional Championship in 2018. So both these players relatively just as active as each other, really, over the last few years too. So, and obviously still going into 2023, as I think all of us would want to be.
Yeah, Giuseppe winning that regional in Germany back in 2018, and now we're in Germany again. He's in a great position, so maybe that's kind of where he feels success. Let's dive deeper into the teams, though, however. Faaiz is running, again, that Torkoal, but the one I really want to talk about, again, is that Great Tusk. It's a Pokemon running here with the Focus Sash. We've seen some Life Orb variants, I believe, on Marcus's team as well, that was piloted to great effect. But again, the key thing here is the move pool. It's a little bit different. There's no Stone Edge here, but the unique thing for me is that Ice Spinner.
Yeah, and it's still another option that does hit those flying types super effectively, where Stone Edge does, Ice Spinner does the same here too. And I think it's a good option too, because you definitely want to have a matchup for some of the common duos going around, like in DD Armarouge, for instance, where terrain is a really big factor behind the composition there. So Ice Spinner be able to control that a little bit better does make sense, and that kind of frees up something like the King Gambit to keep going off those sucker punches, which it otherwise couldn't use in the psychic terrain.
Yeah, that's true. The nice synergy to support those priority moves is really nicely played out here. Again, taking a look at Giuseppe's side, we've got another King Gambit there rocking that sucker punch, but again, some of the key Pokemon that we've spoken about, that Iron Bundle, the Fluttermane, really, really strong cores. The Dragonite's an interesting one as well. Dragonite's, again, gone through lots of twists and turns and changes in terms of how it fits into the meta. This one's running the Lumberry. That's an interesting choice.
It is, and that's because the Will-O-Wisp has been quite commonly used on Arcanine, so I don't blame him for kind of doing that here. And you might want other items on Dragonite as well. We've seen Life Orb with the Inner Focus, but the multi-scale is the choice of ability here. So that makes Dragonite obviously be able to take just half damage from any of its first attacks that kind of goes into it. Interesting though, there's no kind of Protect to kind of preserve that multi-scale. So I wouldn't be surprised to see if Giuseppe maybe does like to bring his Dragonites to games, but maybe doesn't lead it, just in case a Fake Out kind of comes out, because there's nothing he can really do to stop it with an Inner Focus or something. But here is the leads.
Yes, we have got that Fluttermane and the Mousehold paired up for Faaiz, and on the opposing side, the Amoonguss and the King Gambit. So lots of good support from both players here with redirection from either Mousehold or the Amoonguss.
So yeah, this Mousehold is running arguably what we've seen as standard at the moment. No kind of population bomb. That seems to be quite rare. It's the Super Fang, Follow Me, Helping Hand, Protect, Safety Goggles, and of course the Ghost type Terrestrialization ability, which often they do run, because Mousehold is such a good lead at the moment. Redirection is such a strong component, as we know in Amoonguss, but with Follow Me, that does ignore the Safety Goggles. So Moonblast and Super Fang double up into the King Gambit, and it's not quite a knockout.
Oh, Kingambit able to hang on with a slither of HP, able to retaliate with their Calton Cleave into the Fluttermane as the Amoonguss follows up with a Spore. So double ups on both sides of the field. Faaiz really trying to remove Kingambit from the fray, but it was not enough to get the knockout.
Yeah, bold of Giuseppe to go for that Spore there, because the follow me on Mousehole is pretty safe there for Faaiz, but again, it's open team sheets, there's always the option for him to do that, but Giuseppe being quite bold there, goes for the Spore anyway, which I do like, because it means that Kingambit still would then take a lot less damage, but here comes Game 2 straight away, another Super Fang.
Yeah, the mice are on a rampage right now, going for another Super Fang into the Amoonguss. It's able to use the Citrus Berry to regain a little bit of that recovery, and now the Fluttermane has to take its guaranteed turn of sleep. That means it will fall victim to another Calton Cleave, meaning that Giuseppe is able to get the knockout on that Paradox Pokemon very early on. Of course, the Mousehold sitting here with those safety goggles is going to worry about taking a Spore. The open team sheets allow the Amoonguss to see this, so it says, do you know what, I'm going to help out my partner, side Pollen Puff, and regain a little bit of recovery to that Kingambit.
Love that. Giuseppe played that really nicely there. Like, we haven't really seen Kingambit on a lot of teams, or really kind of brought in here, and especially as a lead too, because obviously it doesn't offer a lot of speed initially, but it is that bulk that we have now seen it to be able to take so many of those hits. So if you're looking for an answer for these Paradox Pokemon, you can see that Kingambit really can be able to take those hits, especially with that Assault Vest that it's running.
Yeah, I'm glad you called out the Assault Vest there, because I think that was really key. The Fluttermane is running Choice Specs. That's going to deal an extra 50% damage to that Moonblast, and Kingambit was able to survive it. So the item choice is really coming in clutch here for Giuseppe's team building.
Okay, so Mousehold is now going to come switch out here. There's not a whole lot for it to do right now, but there is obviously still the threat of that follow me into the safety goggles. So possibly Faaiz is kind of banking on here and using his Great Tusk to kind of dish out a lot of damage, especially if this is Photosynthesis boost into that attack to maybe deal with this Amoonguss.
Really love the synergy here. You get the activation, so you get the attack boost, meaning that the Great Tusk is free to not have booster energy. It can go for that Focus Sash here on Faiz's side. It wants to deal all the damage to get some revenge, so it's also going to go for its Terra Ground, get an additional 50% boost here on its attack, so that it's going to be able to try and get a knockout against Giuseppe's Pokemon here. It goes for the single target Headlong Rush, finds its mark down onto that opposing Amoonguss, removes the little mushroom from the fray. No more Spore, no more redirection, no more Pollen Puff to contend with, and I think that's a really big knockout here for Faaiz.
That's a huge knockout, yeah, like just piling on all the power there that it can, and especially with like a switch in there, it's really kind of hard to call for Giuseppe, because that was a Mousehold just this turn, but as we saw, Torkoal, having just switched in, could do so much here. Sets the sun, gives the Great Tusk such a boost to its power, and we saw it just be able to completely clean this out. And that switching power as well we see is quite useful when people are running Dondozo, for instance, because you can suddenly switch in that Tatsugiri and suddenly the board state has changed completely. So that's where Torkoal is really shining here.
And I love the supportive build of this Torkoal as well. You know, it's running that bulkier variant because we've seen how well it can take those attacks. It's running things like Yawn, Helping Hand to be supportive. It is still running that Flamethrower, so it has some offensive pressure and it can benefit from the Sun as well, get a boost to its Fire-type moves, and that's something that the Kingambit has to watch out for. The interesting Pokemon, however, of course, is going to be that Dragonite. It's here relatively unchecked. At the end of the day, it's still got its Flying-type and Fray. It doesn't have to worry about any of the Ground-type moves coming out from this Great Tusk, but it does have to watch out for the Ice Spinner. That's going to be 4 times super effective into that Dragonite if it doesn't want to Terra. Even if it does, it can only Terra into the Flying type, and that's still going to deal damage from those ice moves.
I think the Terra is still the play for Giuseppe, because it's the only way you can dish out the maximum amount of damage with that Terra Blast, which is its most reliable kind of flying move here. Ice Spinner is obviously decent into the Great Tusk as well, but Terra Blast, especially with the Terastallization boost as well, will end up actually being equally as strong as well, and reliable into kind of regardless of any kind of follow me shenanigans here as well. So here it is, Flying type Dragonite versus the ground Terastallized Great Tusk.
Yeah, that multi-scale, as it is intact, is going to help out the Dragonite as well. It does indeed go for that Terra Blast, and it is going to be able to catch the Mousehold that just went for the switch in here for Faaiz. It is not enough to get the knockout. Friendguard still going to be there potentially to help out, but no, the double up from Kingambit gets the knockout. Unfortunately, Great Tusk protecting to really null and void at this point for Faaiz. Not going to be able to utilize that Friendguard in the next turn.
That was, yeah, a huge double up there. Like, really well played by Giuseppe. He seems to be really just finding his mark on every single play that he makes. And that was going to like, what was the Torkoal slot, which again does have the ability to protect here. So he's really kind of going for the slots as to what Faaiz is kind of really not wanting to protect. He's kind of really at the moment in his head. So Faaiz really needs to kind of switch something up here at the moment to be able to do what he wants to do. And the Ice Spin is looking decent into this Dragonite. Obviously, the Dragonite is still multi-scale, so it's still really not going to take much damage. Now Torkoal's on the field too. It's still not going to do much. But Dragonite here is such a great bring, especially now with the Lumberry too, because it doesn't even care about the Yawn either.
Well, Torkoal's here to help, giving Helping Hand to Great Tusk. Going to have to take some damage from that Sucker Punch, which means its Focus Sash will be broken. But Great Tusk able to go for the Ice Spinner, but Multiscale really paying off. Dragonite able to absolutely take that Helping Hand boosted Ice-type move. It can now retaliate with this Terra Blast into the Great Tusk, and the combination with Sucker Punch is going to be able to get the knockout. Now, I know that Torkoal has been, you know, a key Pokemon in this tournament so far, but I think it's a bit of an uphill mountain for it to climb in this Game 1.
After those defense drops from the Headlong Rush earlier, yeah, that Terra Blast and that Sucker Punch is definitely going to be that one-hit knockout there. So excellently played by Giuseppe so far still, and you can see Torkoal is there and it has done its help, but it's going to respectively withdraw for now.
Yeah, I really would have liked to see Faaiz capitalize on that turn. Instead of going for the Protect on Great Tusk, maybe going for the Ice Spinner, getting some good damage on the board and also breaking that multi-scale. But I have to credit the way Giuseppe played that, going for all of the reads, reading that Great Tusk was going to go for the Protect. I'm going to double up into the Mouse Hold and double up into that slot. And obviously Mouse Hold switched in. It just was able to get the knockout against it. Even if you had left the Torkoal in, the combination would have still been devastating.
Something that we haven't talked a lot about is the King Gambit just kind of sat there for like...
Quite literally sat there.
Yeah. For like most of the game. And it's a really good bring too, because King Gambit's Terror type as well is Fire, which obviously bringing into a Torkoal matchup is quite decent here, where normally it would get hit quite hard, and we've not often seen King Gambit's Terrestrialization type to be either the Dark, to make the most of those Dark type moves and take away the Steel type weaknesses that it has, or maybe something like a Fairy, but a Fire is really key here too. And I also like that into an opposing Arcanine, for instance, also means then you're immune to the Will-O-Wisps as well. So it's a really nice option here for Giuseppe too, especially if Faaiz wants to bring his Torkoal. He can't then also hit with any kind of super effective water moves, which is why I guess on his Iron Bundle he doesn't have those water moves, kind of like how Marcus did too. So it's a really nice bring here, or generally any Fire type, because Great Tusk is the main answer for it. And as you can see, Giuseppe played really well to kind of take that out.
I think it was difficult for Faaiz as well at the beginning of that game, you know, not getting the knockout on that King Gambit, and then it just enabled Giuseppe to keep it on the field, like you said, and then just apply pressure with things like Sucker Punch or the Calton Cleave, particularly when Amoonguss was able to heal it up with that Pollen Puff. It made it even more difficult to break through. I think it really comes down then to the physical attackers, because, you know, that was still a Choice Specs, Moonblast, a Super Fang dealing damage. It just wasn't enough, so possibly the Great Tusk, which is on the field now, is going to be the key to removing that King Gambit.
Now this looks like a pretty good lead for Faaiz, I'd say.
I mean, Torkoal's there, it's pretty strong.
It is, exactly. And as we saw, it has the ability to set up the Sun, which it already has done, activate the Photosynthesis, and with combination with Terrestrialization to the Ground type and the Helping Hand that Torkoal has as well, there's so much damage potential from the Headlong Rush into either of these targets at the moment. So it's really on Giuseppe, who's definitely on the back foot at the moment here, to be able to call as to what he's going to go for. Because no sort of terrestrialization on either of his Pokemon can even take the combination that this Great Tusk can put out. So I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe a Dragonite switching on Giuseppe's end to maybe take a potential ground type move coming his way, but it's just to protect.
Yeah, I love to see the switch into Mouse Hold, though. It's rocking those safety goggles, so it isn't going to fall victim to a Spore that the Amoonguss might well have been going into that slot with. The Calton Cleave is going to do over to 50% to it, though, and there is the Spore. It was actually going to the protect of the Great Tusk, so nice defensive play here by Faaiz. You have got the Mouse Hold in safely in this game one. I mean, relatively safely. It's taken a chunk of damage, so it can now redirect those Spores away potentially.
A missed opportunity, though, for Great Tusk to actually got a key knockout on literally either of those Pokemon. Giuseppe just kind of left it wide open, say, right, okay, if you're going to go for it, and then I'm going to get off some sort of attack on either of your other Pokemon. So saying, if you get your King Gambit, I'm going to put your Great Tusk to sleep, but if you go for Amoonguss, then I get your Kowtow Cleave into your Torkoal. But again, that way round, though, wasn't going to be too bad here, especially. But as we know, it's open team sheets, both the Amoonguss especially can protect here. So there is definitely that fear in Faiz's mind as to not be able to commit that terrestrialization too early, but turn 2, here it is.
Yes, we saw Marcus actually do this in game in his match actually, where he terrored on that next turn, and we can see it here on this ground type. Mousehold here to help hand as well and boost up the offensive pressure of these ground type moves. Amoongus actually going to go for the protect, doesn't want to take any unnecessary damage, knows that it is a threat that Faaiz has to deal with, as Kratos goes for the headlong rush into that slot. So a fantastic defensive play by Giuseppe, knowing the Amoongus was going to be the target of Faaiz here, allowing King Gambit once again to freely go for a counter on cleave and remove this Mousehold from play. Faaiz has now lost once again that key supportive Pokemon.
Yeah, the threat of that Spore there is quite big, so I can understand Faaiz going into that slot, but yeah, it's a nice safe protect for Giuseppe there, because if the move does go into the King Gambit, it doesn't have a huge amount of use at the moment, especially into the Great Tusk itself. It allows you to get a free switch in, say, into the Dragonite, so it's not something that he needs to keep on the field anymore at the moment, but every turn that is left there, it's just getting just chip down on everything that it can and just keep picking up those knockouts. But here comes a Sucker Punch now, so it keeps doing this damage.
Yeah, with a critical hit as well, manages to break the Focus Sash. Great Tusk able to retaliate with that Ice Spinner, but you see it's not able to do enough damage. Possibly the Torkoal can help out with a follow through with a Flamethrower, but again, that Berry just regaining the HP on the Amoongus, making it even more difficult to get rid of, and Torkoal can't do anything because it's going to be taking a nap. The Spore outside of Trick Room is going to be able to connect down onto it. It's funny to see the Mushroom outspeed some things here, and now of course you've got this issue where Amoongus is on the field. It can go for that again. We know that the Great Tusk can't KO it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tough position here. Great Tusk has so much damage potential, and it has so much support in the Torkoal with the Sun, the helping hand on both the Mousehold and the Torkoal. But when you have all your eggs in the damage basket of Great Tusk, and it's kind of as soon as a Protect comes up, there's no damage from your partner at the moment, which seems to be happening here. And here comes a Rage Powder from the Amoongus into the protecting Great Tusk.
I mean, Torkoal's obviously taken one turn of sleep. It could very well wake up, and that's something Faaiz, I think, desperately needs in this game too. It's going to have to take a Cowton Cleave, but it's not enough to shake it out of its slumber, and it is going to be taking another turn of sleep.
Yeah, so again, another wasted Protect on Great Tusk here. Giuseppe's really in Faiz's head at the moment, and there was kind of not a lot of potential for Great Tusk to go down at the moment either. Sucker Punch and Counter Cleave have fairly similar base power as well, so it was likely not going to be able to go down to any sort of move, as again, because we haven't got any Headlong Rush drops either. So again, it was another opportunity to go for, say, a Headlong Rush into the Amoongus and get that KO here, and the Torkoal still not waking up. It's definitely unfortunate, but again, another missed opportunity.
Well, the Amoongus here is just going to go for that Rage Powder, draw in those attacks and protect King Gambit once again. Great Tusk going for the Ice Spinner here into the Amoongus. Again, not enough to get the KO here. You really need something like the Flamethrower to follow up and get the knockout. Great Tusk able to survive the Cowton Cleaver. Torkoal is awake, however, though. It's now able to go for that Flamethrower into the Amoongus, and that's a sigh of relief for Faaiz. However, both his Pokemon have taken a huge chunk of damage while that Torkoal's been resting.
And if Dragonite's in the back, it does have that extreme speed, so it doesn't even need to be faster than this Great Tusk to be able to just pick it off. Torkoal is there. It's a good fire type, and it's got that Flamethrower, but it's not going to do a whole lot into Dragonite, especially with the Yawners. It's kind of only other option to kind of do something to an opposing team. Dragonite is looking, pretty comfortable at the moment. So, and Mousehold is down in the back, and it could be that Fluttermane in the back, which could definitely help with the Dragonite, but you definitely want more of a safer switch in for it, and not into something like a Kowtow Cleave that this King Gambit just keeps on attacking with.
I mean, this is the key thing as well. You need the Great Tusk to deal with the King Gambit. The special attackers are not going to cut it. And so you're now in this awkward situation where the Dragonite is just free to go for something like an Extreme Speed. But then the way Faaiz has been playing, he does like to preserve and protect on that Great Tusk. And this could be like a really key opportunity where Giuseppe could be like, I feel like it's going to be a very easy protect here. I'm going to target the partner Pokemon. But no, the Sucker Punch actually coming through, the priority move on the King Gambit, able to get that knockout.
Yep, so showing off the priority presence here. No speed control needed for Giuseppe here. Dragonite comes up with the super effective move this time, so really using his resources well. Stomping Tantrum into the Torkoal, which does not do too much, thanks to Torkoal's really big defense. Flamethrower comes out, breaking the multi-scale. No burn, though, this time to kind of burn the Lumberry. So Torkoal heals up a little bit with his leftovers.
That's the thing, even if you get the burn, it's not going to hang around. You're going to need to get another one on follow-up as well. Really nice item choice for Giuseppe here. Faaiz is now down to his last 2 remaining Pokemon, Fluttermane being revealed in the back, and Fluttermane is a good offensive pressure. It's running those choice specs, so it could always go for something like a Dazzling Gleam here and do some good damage, but the issue is Kingambit, it's got full HP at the moment. Great Tusk went down before it was able to deal with it, so I feel like Giuseppe is able to, use that Pokemon to get some key knockouts here.
And Giuseppe hasn't even gone for his terrestrialization yet. Like,
true.
there's still kind of like defensive play that he can still make, even after losing his Amoonguss here. So Dragonite can Terra out of that dragon, really take the hits really well. And with choice specs being on Fluttermane, there's no kind of potential for maneuverability and protecting around that. So it's really looking pretty good for Giuseppe in this matchup at the moment, as we do now see the Terra Flying once again on the Dragonite.
Yeah, he had 2 great options here, the Terra Flying on Dragonite or the Terra Fire on that Kingambit, but Dragonite's going to be able to hit harder with a Terra Blast boosted up by that Flying, but Fluttermane actually going for the Power Gem here. It isn't enough to get the KO, and its choice specs locked into this now. Dragonite able to retaliate with this Terra Blast. It's going to find its mark down onto that opposing Fluttermane and get a solid one-hit KO against it.
Yeah, that's a really good calculation to know, and maybe Giuseppe, it's something that he does really know. Ironhead goes into the Torkoal this time, probably making sure it's going to pick up a KO or chance of a flinch as well at the same time. Flamethrower into the Kingambit, again with that Assault Vest, the bulk, despite the fire and the sun, it's just still taking those hits so well. It's such a good bring here. And as you can see, Faaiz goes for the forfeit, and that is a 2-0 decisive win for Giuseppe.
Absolutely fantastic. Torkoal that was so dominant yesterday has, I think, now suffered its first loss on the broadcast. But I mean, you just have to credit the way Giuseppe was able to play that, really locking down what Faaiz was trying to do, making sure the Kingambit stayed on the field, particularly the way it's been built so defensively, that just meant it was so difficult for Faaiz to deal with it and KO it, and therefore it was able to sit on that field in Game 1 and in Game 2 and keep chipping away, making Faaiz always on the back foot.
And especially when you're not bringing your Iron Bundle from Faiz's end, you're going to really struggle against the Dragonite. It was something that was just so able to be brought in the back. That multi-scale, it could still take any hits, even despite the fact that without the multi-scale, it probably could still survive so many attacks. So it was able to go for that reliable terrestrialization and just start hitting the slots that it needed to, because there was not a lot threatening it either. So for the Dragonite for Giuseppe was absolutely huge, and there just didn't be no way for Faaiz to kind of position his Great Tusk around it to be able to deal with the partners it had.
And we once again got to see the disruption of Amoonguss, being able to put Pokemon to sleep with Spore, but I think the critical thing was it was such an issue on the field, it almost forced Faaiz to double up into it. And then when it wasn't able to get the KO, then Giuseppe had the utility to go for moves with both Pokemon, whether it was a Spore or whether it was the redirection already. It just then enabled that Kingambit to be able to deal big damage. And the interesting thing in that game too is I'm pretty sure the lead was the Amoonguss and the Kingambit, right?
It was.
And it was just there for almost the whole game. It was only really towards the end that we saw the Dragonite.
Yeah, and you can see Faaiz one game down, and the mindset that kind of gives you, especially when you're on stream as well, is that when you've got your position where you have the potential to just take the knockout you want, and you're thinking, well, I've got this high level of play, I'm in day 2 Swiss, we're both X1. Surely he protects the Amoonguss, right? And then when he just doesn't, you're like, oh, I so know the feeling. And so it's just a completely missed opportunity. But from Giuseppe's end, he's got one game up. He can afford to maybe do a bit of trading, as it were. Take a KO, but then you get this. Or take another KO, and then you get this instead. So whereas Faaiz is maybe trying to go all in on a certain play, and obviously that kind of bit back a little bit.
But you're right, calling those protects is a key thing that you need to do. Sometimes it goes not so much away, and then sometimes in the case of Giuseppe, it goes perfectly, where you kind of go, that Great Tusk is going to protect, I'm going to double into the other slot. And then if your fight is that unfortunate thing where you're like, oh, that was a wasted opportunity. I could have dealt some big damage with something like the Ice Spinner in particular against that Dragonite. But that's how Pokemon go sometimes. It's, sometimes you win some, sometimes you lose some, but both of these players are not out of the competition yet. They're still very much within contention for that top card. Obviously, Giuseppe now with a fantastic X&1 record.
Yeah, and so we are now ready for the interview with Giuseppe, our winner of the round 3.
And Mike, go out to a bit of advice. Hello everybody, welcome back to the 2023 Bochum Pokemon Regional Championships. My name's Ben Kiriakou, joined here on the couch by our winner from the previous round, Giuseppe, beating Faaiz in a commanding fashion. How are you feeling right now?
Yeah, I feel really good because this trio in the Day 2 Swiss should guarantee me the top cut. And honestly, before this tournament, I didn't really expect that. And so I'm very happy about that.
It's a really great performance to be having, and Faaiz is a player that's been doing so well in this tournament already. Both of you going in at X1, and now obviously you're continuing that streak on. So getting close to that top cut position. Just a little bit about the game. You had a really good set there. It seemed like you knew exactly what Faaiz was going to be doing every single turn. Tell us a little bit about your thought process when you were thinking about the matchup.
Yeah, okay. I saw his team, and it was a very beautiful team, and I didn't have answers for that because I had to respect the Mausol plus Flatterman plus Ken Gambit, and even Torkoal boosting Flatterman or Great Tusk was so difficult for me to handle. So thinking about that, I thought you should go with Mausol in lead, like game one, and I'll do a bit Flatterman Mausol. I don't really beat that, but I tried leading Amungus and Making Gambit, which gives me some plays even if he leads like with Great Tusk like did in game 2. And yeah, turn 1, he made this plays Super Fang plus Moonblast that I think was a roll on Making Gambit. I was very lucky in there, but honestly I didn't expect that play because my Rage Powder would have made me a better position in that there. But surviving was clutch and even better because I spoiled making waste a turn, and the game was easier from there.
Yeah, that survival was absolutely massive in that turn, but that King Gambit stayed on the field for the rest of the game, and it did so well, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly, because at that point his Great Tusk didn't have Earthquake, so he could do damage only with to one Pokemon at a time. And he also had the Spinner move, which could cover my Dragon and switch in. So I thought that if I want to win, I have to call his place because the matchup was like that. And maybe if from his side, if you have a really good matchup, and I think he had, maybe you try to make safe plays. You think, okay, here I target the slot, but because he has to switch in, and you do these plays that are maybe could be predicted, and that's what I did. Honestly, I was very lucky some turns because he made passive plays like protecting and targeted the slot, and it made it in the game.
Yeah, he really took advantage of all of those defensive plays so well in that match. And especially it's nice to see the thought process with the Great Tusk only being able to hit one Pokemon at a time. That makes your Amoonguss so powerful in the match.
Exactly.
Just moving a little bit further out of the tournament, you're a previous regional champion of Sindelfingen, I believe, back in 2018. And you know, coming into these regional championships, what's your approach for your preparation before coming into a tournament this size?
Yeah, I won the regional like 5 years ago. It was totally different life for me because I was a student, had a lot of free time, and now I work. So even preparing for a tournament when the metagame changes 2 weeks before the tournament is so difficult for me because I have less time than I had before. But now I didn't really expect to do well in this tournament because I wasn't sure about the team. I tried to find something else, but it was the team I did better, like on ladder. And okay, I told myself, I use the team. I know how to use that. I know that it's not a good team, and I still think it is not a really good team. But now it's working. So
maybe not the best team out there, but definitely, you know, you're piloting it so well, and it's clearly working for you. That's so good to hear. Talk about your advice as well then for players that would be looking to get into VGC and come to these tournaments. Is there any sort of specific thing you'd say that would be a great thing for new trainers to do to practice?
Yeah, I think that the easier way to get into this game is to follow some content creators, because in the recent years a lot of content creators are actually really good players Verizon, like Marco Fiero, Federico Camporesi, Francesco Pardini, Flavio Del Pido. in Italy specifically, but even outside of Italy, there are a lot of content creators who can show you how to play this game, which team are strong, which team are not, and how to improve actually. So, and that's how I started. That's how I suggest starting to someone else. Yeah.
They're fantastic resources, and getting the insight of great players, being able to explain how those plays or why they make the plays that they do is so valuable. Before we cut to a break, is there any shout outs that you want to make to any friends or family that have been helping you along the way at the moment?
Yeah, I want to shout out my friends like Marco Fiero, Genius Ferecampo, because when I don't have time to test, like they help me getting into the game easily. Like they tell me, okay, this is what people are running, this is what is strong, and they actually coach me for free, and without them I wouldn't play this game anymore. So I want to shout out to them. Yeah.
The friendships that we make along the way are so valuable in this game. That's all we've got time for at the moment, but congratulations, Giuseppe.
Thank you.
Good luck for the final couple of rounds that we have in the Bochum Regional Championships. We're going to be going to a short break now, but we will be right back with round 12.